Hi, I'm Jason Gregor. You're listening to the Shaun Newman podcast.
Respect on your map. Hey, what's wrong with that? We live where we are. There's not much around. It's barely a town, but a lot goes down at dark. It's Friday night, let's run off the rails, baby, heads or tails. We can get a buzz on right in the middle of a whole bunch of neon lights. Or maybe take a back road down by the river, wind up wherever you like. Either way, girl, I'm okay, cause you're here by my side. So let's just let the wheels roll wherever they go. We're alright, we're heading for a good time.
Woo. How fun was that to start a podcast that way? That's the first time for that, folks. I bet I caught a few of you off guard this morning. Happy Wednesday, hump day here. We're going to try something a little new this week. I threw out a couple posts on social media yesterday, reaching out to anyone wanting to get a little free advertising. I think, around Lloydminster, and I think pretty much everywhere at this point. I can't remember a time where, you lose your job in whatever industry you're in, and you can't, if you're a worker, you just don't go pick up another job and get back to work. But right now, everybody, staying at home, oil where it's at, businesses closing shop, you name it, you talk to anyone, it's the topic around town right now. You can't even sit and have coffee with somebody. You got to do it via, FaceTime or what technology you have. So I got a list of businesses that reached out, so I want to go through them. I really appreciate them trusting me to get their message out. I hope I do them justice. If I missed anyone or you're just hearing this for the first time, I'm going to do this until this gets done with. So once we open doors up and people are back out and around and everything going on, I will, up until that point, you want to get something on here, you just DM me, text me, look me up, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, anything you want. I can try and get it on there, or get it on here, I should say. So first, Corey Dubik, Midwest Flooring, he reached out. They're open for business, same hours, Monday through Friday. Can shop online or in-store. Give them a call, 780-875-8448. That's here in Lloyd. Carly Clausen and Windsor Plywood Boys, they built me my table, which I am longing to sit around, I got to be honest. It's been a couple days since I got to stare at that beauty. But they're still open regular hours. Right now they're promoting calling in orders to promote that, help promote that physical distancing. They're able to set material out front for curbside pickup and loading, and for the time being, they're doing in-town deliveries for free. So give them a call, 780-875-9663. The boys at Factory, longtime supporters of the podcast here, they're urging you to continue to shop local. I think that's a big message from all these companies. They say although their storefront is closed to the public, the boys are on standby waiting to take phone calls and get you what you need. 306-825-7678. Give them a call if you're looking for anything. They'll get you hooked up. Kyle Tapp, IHD, longtime supporter of the podcast. He was a guest on here as well. Wanted me to highlight two local boys who have just signed their entry-level deals in the NHL, one being Bryce Kindop with the Anaheim Mighty Ducks, and Brinson Pashnik, who just signed with the San Jose Sharks. Heathrow, long supporter Heathrow, he says earmuffs for the kids. Would like to take this time to tell everyone to quit fucking buying all the toilet paper in town. And then he adds a little chuckle at the end, as if you know Heathrow, you know the chuckle I'm talking about. What a strange thing to, I know everybody's talking about it, but toilet paper, of all things, people. Colin Ringette with CR Sales and Marketing would like to tell everyone to be safe. And if you're a business owner that needs representation after this virus, contact him, 780-871-1417. He probably stares at me from his balcony into the backyard every day. He lives across the street, and I'm sure he sees my kids doing kid things. They seem to get into a lot of trouble, and they're having lots of fun right now. But anyone who's got kids at this point, first off, I'm envious of anyone who doesn't because I love my kids. I don't know how my wife is. I think she's on like day like 18, folks, of quarantine, like with 3 kids under 4. Like I pull my hair out and it's been about 10 days now. So she's a superhero. But anyone who's sitting there with no kids, I envy you because you probably, you wake up, you have your coffee, oh, what are we going to do today? And, you got your work to get done. Maybe you don't. Maybe you've got laid off for the time being. Hopefully you're back on your feet soon. But, man, it must be quiet in there. And you're probably annoyed by the quiet. I tell you what, I'll give you 3 children for a couple hours, and we'll spruce that rate up. Stacy Jubinville, Wandering Wild Apparel. I talked about buying a hat off her last week. She says the small businesses are the heart of every community, and I believe a lot of them need you more than ever right now. If you purchase $100 or more with her, $25 of that will go towards a gift card of a local small business of your choice as a gift back to you. So spend $100 and you get a $25 gift card to wherever you want to go. And so she says whether it's your favorite local restaurant, clothing store, woodworker, or artist, we can show them some love. I 100% agree. Larissa Scott, Grit Athletic Performance. She's started every Tuesday doing a Tip It Forward Tuesday, a random act of kindness challenge. Check out their Instagram page. She says just a way to spread some positivity through our community. So I'm going to keep my eyes posted on that. I think that's a brilliant idea. Anytime we can, put some smiles on some people's faces. Everywhere I go, I have a conversation. I got to remind myself to, I'm usually a pretty happy-go-lucky guy, and right now it is a lot of doom and gloom. So let's try and cheer some people up on Tuesdays. Keep an eye out for that. I think that's brilliant, Larissa. She says, as of today, so if you're listening again, this is April 1st, you're not hearing a joke. She's offering 3 programs with huge discounts where if you spend $100, $25 of your gift card will go to a local business. So once again, give you $25 back. And then she's going to, on top of that, she's going to donate $25 of it to the Lloydminster Regional Health Foundation to help support frontline staff and residents in need. Lori LeBurge, Abbey Road Flowers and Gifts, temporarily closed to walk-in traffic. However, they are offering curbside pickup and free delivery within Lloydminster. Current hours are 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. Monday through Friday. Please call 780-875-2211 or visit on Instagram and Facebook. I might have to order some flowers. I think my wife has probably had enough of the kids, but she's probably had enough of this big kid by now. I'm sure I'm driving her nuts. Her friends probably already know that via several texts, I'm sure. Ken Rutherford, yes, Ken, the episode number 1 of the Shaun Newman podcast, where the Shaun Newman podcast is housed in his Rutherford appraisal group. Lots of love here for you, Ken. He says he's in the business of valuing any kind of real estate, homes, shops, farms, restaurants, cabins, or any kind of property. If you need an appraisal for a bank loan or to set up a fair purchase price or buying, selling, give his office a call, 306-307-1732. Ken is the man. You won't find anyone better, I promise. Malcolm Radke had sent me along 2 notes. The first one, I apologize if there was supposed to be a name attached to it. I'm just going to call it anonymous. It's a note, I believe, from a nurse, and I think I'll just read it here and you guys can hear. So it says, it's been a couple of weeks now that our lives have been turned on a dime. When one takes a step back, the scope and breadth of a pandemic is not something anyone could ever prepare for. Not mentally, not emotionally, not until you're in it. What you don't expect, though, in the midst of the fear and the exhaustion, are the little, and in some cases, huge moments of grace. The absolute outpouring of love and kindness we are seeing from our community is an overwhelming moment of grace to me, and that love and kindness makes it worth going to work the next day. From the dental offices and companies who are selflessly donating hundreds upon hundreds of masks after just one call, to the restaurants bringing in food for the workers just to brighten our day. The staff who are thinking outside the box and bringing in supplies from outside normal healthcare routes. To the phone calls and texts of friends and family willing to man their sewing machines and make masks, each person or company who do this selflessly are my moments of grace in this. I know these are scary times. I'm scared too. And these are early days. Our world has changed in just weeks, and it's going to change even more, making it almost too much to fathom. But this love and support from our community makes me proud to be a nurse. And I hope then things settle, and they will. And that this new sense of team and kindness for one another is our new normal. Our new normal. Man, I got through that all and then butchered the last sentence. And if your hairs didn't rise a little bit from that, I don't know if you're human. That was, to whoever that was well written. I really enjoyed that. I got one other note here. Malcolm had passed on me from Dr. Kevin Governor. He said, I want to extend the sincerest gratitude of all Lloydminster and area healthcare professionals to the community of Lloydminster for their overwhelming support during these trying times. With the generous help of the Lloydminster Region Health Foundation and numerous members of our fantastic community, we've been able to acquire the personal protective equipment that we need to provide safe care to our patients. Your efforts are much appreciated. I want to take this opportunity to plead with all of you to exercise social distancing during this time. It's the only way to ensure that we minimize the spread of COVID-19. Stay safe. I also got an email from a business in town. They wanted to remain anonymous, but it's a cool little email chain going around right now where you can buy Skip the Dishes gift cards and take them into Malcolm Radke at the Lloydminster Regional Health Foundation. He'll issue you a receipt for whatever you purchase, so whether you're business or personal, and then he'll drop them off at for the frontline workers, for them and their families while they're busy, making sure that all of us are taken care of. Essentially, if you, here's the steps. Step 1, log into your Skip the Dishes account or create one. Click gift cards at the bottom. Use your business credit card or your credit card to load up some gift cards and print them out. It says it's super easy. Email Malcolm at Malcolm, MALCOLM .radke, RADKE at LRHF.ca. He'll arrange for a pickup for the printed cards and get you a receipt. And step 4 is obviously repeat. And that's going around right now. I think that's a really, really cool idea as well. Another thing that's going on in Lloyd and just finding ways to help. And I think that's super cool, and super cool on the company in town for getting that kicked off. Just a reminder that people care. People are thinking of everyone. I know the social distancing can get you kind of stressed and feeling it every day. And don't forget your phone is a powerful little device. I've learned to connect with friends via FaceTime, and it's, I tell you, 2 weeks ago, I would have never thought to pick up my phone and FaceTime somebody. It probably would have been awkward, to be honest. And now, the other night, Mel and I sat down with Colby and Deidre, good friends of ours, and we sat there and had, a couple beers and just a good old bullshit. And it was healthy. It felt good. And like I say, a week prior to that, you would have got a babysitter and hopped down and went and had a good night and came home and, no different. But times have changed, and we got to take care of ourselves. We got to take care of our friends and family, and never forget that a simple phone call goes a long way to letting people know you're thinking about them. And a little love, in the form of what these businesses are doing, or that they're open. If you got projects on the go now that you got a little bit of time, they can help you out. Show them some love. They've been, a lot of these local businesses have really supported some of our local charities and teams in the past, and now they're asking for some help. And I think a lot of us, if we are able to, should be lending a hand and trying to do that. Heck, if you don't have the money, a little pet peeve of mine, and I'm rambling right now, and I apologize, folks. I'll get to Jason Gregor here in a quick moment, but if you don't got money and you're pinching pennies, I think everybody understands that. something you could do, as we all just saw, we're living in Canada, and bloody it won't stop snowing. Grab your shovel and go shovel a neighbor's driveway. I got 3 little kids. We were out for a walk. Nothing just drives me more nuts than, nobody shoveling a driveway, because we're hauling 12 different things down the sidewalk. And now you got to try and go through a snowdrift up to my knee. And if you got a little bit extra time, lend a little hand, give somebody a smile, and really let's try and help everyone out here and pull together through this thing. Now, here's your Factory Sports Tail of the Tape. On the show today is Jason Gregor. If you're sitting there going, who is Jason Gregor? Well, obviously you're not a sports person. Jason Gregor is on TSN 1260 out of Edmonton. He owns and operates his entire show. I want you to think about that. He buys airtime off the radio station, does all the marketing, does all the show content. He is a fantastic talk. Fantastic. Really enjoyed him. He quit his job at 27. He was working in the oil patch, and then hops into radio. And gangbusters, let me tell you. And it was just a fantastic hour. I think you guys are really, really, really going to enjoy this one. So I'll stop babbling without further ado. Well, first off, thanks or welcome to the Shaun Newman podcast. I got Jason Gregor from TSN 1260 on. Thank you for taking the time to sit down with me. I know I joke on the show, all of us guys, or specifically you guys who go in and have these big radio shows, are kind of stuck at home right now. So you're probably taking 50 of these calls a day just to keep yourself entertained, because, I mean, now you're not out and about. But regardless, thanks for taking the time. I really appreciate it.
No problem. Look forward to it.
Now, you, sir, are my personal favorite at Edmonton. But I have 3 brothers and a sister. And what's fantastic about you is I have a brother who absolutely detests you. And we get in arguments all the time. And I think it's one of your best attributes. I was like, have you been that opinionated from an early age, or is that something that, you kind of developed as you went along?
Yeah, the funny thing is, I don't know if I'm that opinionated, really. I like to debate, and I think if you're going to debate, then back up your debate. Too often, people want to just spew their opinion, but don't have anything to back it up. And I find that that's always entertaining. In our household growing up, we had a lot of discussions. I call it a discussion, and you don't always have to agree with everybody, but if you're going to bring a counterpoint, then you better be able to back up your facts. When if people like to throw out things and I can say, well, actually, that's incorrect, then your opinion, it's great to have an opinion, but your opinion's only worth to the point that you can back it up. I learned that a long time ago reading lots of books, and I've always been a firm believer in that. So, and there's days obviously on radio where, you say things to fire people up. And the thing is about hosting a show, if everybody liked you, then you don't have a good show.
It's a very good point. With discussions in particular, that's a hard thing. Like most conversations, when you're talking about hot subjects, end in arguments. It's very hard to have a discussion, right, where you can actually calm yourself down enough to listen to the other side's point. We see that all the time. I mean, right now with this coronavirus, you go on social media, you can get anything from conspiracy theorists to listening to the scientists to listen to Joe Blow over there. Everybody has their theories on it. And a lot of people tune out the other side, and you see that all the time. So to have a discussion is really a big talent.
Yeah, and you know what? Like Struds and I, we have lots of good debates on the show. And there's times where I'll be on radio where I'll debate a point that I don't necessarily agree with off of the air. But on the air, I have to come up with a counterpoint. Otherwise, it makes for boring radio. So that's something you don't want to do. You don't always want to take the side you don't agree on, because it's a little bit harder to try to defend it sometimes. But if Struds and I, and we see things similar in a lot of cases, if we always agreed, it'd be pretty boring. So now, I'm not, if it's anything that's a real serious topic, I would never go publicly with an opinion that I don't stand on. But when we're talking, analyzing players or things like that. There's times when you can disagree with something just because it makes for entertaining radio. So you always have to mix that part of it in. But Struds and I will have a great debate, and everybody thinks it's heated, and we go to commercial break, and we're like, hey, man, that was a good one, that was perfect, and we're fine.
That's the best, right? When you can have heated discussions and have a chuckle about it after. I mean, you obviously have a pretty tight bond with Jason there on your show. Like, you guys are having a lot of fun right now. I mean, I was going to ask like how you've adjusted. I assume you guys aren't going into the studio anymore. You're doing everything over essentially media outlets like this, right? The ability to tie in together, but self-isolate or social distancing.
Struddy actually comes. We do it from my house.
Okay.
So Struddy comes here. It's just the two of us, and we trust each other enough on what the other person's doing away from it. He's really the only person I think, other than my wife's parents, who live right down the street from us, that have been in our house here in the last few weeks. And so he comes in, scrubs down. We always joke that he's a pre-med guy, so he likes to pretend that he knows how to wipe down properly. But no, we do it right here from the studio. I've done my show on location for many years, so it's actually a little bit easier doing it here because there's not I've done it at bars for 15 years in different places. So here it's just the two of us in my office. Nowadays with technology, it sounds virtually the same as in studio. Our engineers can tell the difference, I think, for guys with a great ear for sound, but for the most part, that's what it is. Now we do sit across the table where we're a good 6 feet apart. We're not shaking hands when we see each other or anything like that. But it's been different because now we don't get into a lot of analyzing anything because there's not a lot of plays to analyze right now. But I like interviews. I've always liked maybe longer theory interviews. And so for the last few weeks, we focused on the 97 Oilers Stars series. We've had players and coaches from both teams, and it's been really good. We did a new segment. We call it Story Time. And we just get different athletes, not necessarily the big name guys. Like we had Frank the Animal Bilois on. Like anybody who's got the nickname the Animal's got a unique story. And he opened up our interview basically saying, well, I just got out of jail. I snuck across the border so I could play in the East Coast League. And the interview only got better from there. So it was I like finding the personalities in sports now. And I think your audience right now, we get a lot of texts every day from people that are just like, thanks, you're giving me an opportunity not to have to think about the reality. Because right now it's a pretty scary situation for a lot of people, emotionally, physically, financially. So, we got 4 hours to just have fun. We like to debate a lot of things. We'll debate movies and TV shows now rather than sports. And, guys always have opinions. And I think I have a sense of what the average guy is interested in. So we like to talk about that.
Speaking of movies, I hear rom-coms are the next upcoming.
Oh, this is Struddy, man. It's like his Stanley Cup. So he's the resident expert on rom-com. So usually we have myself, Struds, Connor Halley, and Tom Gazzolo each submit one option.
Okay.
And then put it online and everybody votes. But we're going to let Struds pick all four rom-coms.
All four?
And then we'll see who they vote on. So.
And these movies are movies you have seen before? I know you just watched Indiana Jones, right?
Yeah.
So those are movies you're just rewatching then.
Yeah, well, I haven't seen Indiana Jones in years, and funny enough, Gazzola and Connor had never seen it, which I couldn't believe. So
really,
yeah, we'll try to. We picked movies like Superbad was, everybody needs a comedy every now and then, and that one was really good. But we do try to slide in a few movies that we haven't seen. Like out of the 4 that were nominated last week, I'd only seen one of them, and it happened to be Raiders of the Lost Ark. So I was kind of disappointed, but it's still a good movie. I hadn't seen it in 20 years, so it's not like I remembered every scene, but. Really what it is it's more so for the comments online, because I think a lot of us, you get into routines and you watch the game at home for hockey. And a lot of people like to go on Twitter and, see what other people were saying about the game. Now, this is a little different, but because, the movie, it's not like there's, bad plays. Now there's some bad scenes, so we'll talk about it, but it's more so trying to give people an opportunity to be connected. And, we get a lot of people that are like, man, I'm, especially somebody who lives at home right now. They said, man, it's just nice to feel like you're communicating with someone, even though they're not there.
Well, and I was talking with my brothers yesterday, and I listen to a lot of podcasts. When I worked out towards Elk Point, Bonnyville, I used to listen to your show all the time. Now I go east, north of North Battleford, and you don't come in, so that sucks. But when I drive, I listen to a ton of radio, podcasts, etc. And I find over the last 2 weeks specifically, you've listened to so much stuff on what's going on in the world, trying to stay up to date, that you can stress yourself out.
Oh
And
yeah. No.
to have some stuff on, just listen to your Ryan Smith interview. Ryan Smith has been my all-time favorite Oiler, and that series you guys are talking about, at the time I would have been, I think, 11 years old. And you guys talk about just how the hockey was played and how good the Stars were. And Oilers, we were just like the blue collar team. Listen, I talk like it was my team, because that year was, those years actually were probably the funnest years of watching the Oilers I ever had, where they just, they come in, they were a complete underdog. When you came to Edmonton, though, the fans were electric. And now going back and listening to you guys kind of retrace the steps of that with all the players and coaches and just people in general that were around then, is for me, that stuff right now is fantastic.
It's been a lot of fun because every player and the coach, they all have a different memory of the series and different games. And even having Andy Moog on yesterday, of course, who won 3 cups with Edmonton, and then he was winding down his career. That was his second last year. And he didn't have a great series, I think, if we're being honest, especially like Smitty's overtime goal in Game 5 was, I think it was from behind the net almost on the goal line. It wasn't an ideal goal, but it went in. But Moog just talked, he gave a really great answer about the Todd Marchand breakaway goal, and how as a goalie on breakaways, it's all about analyzing the speed of the player. And he said, you know what? The difference was there when he should have had his heels at the top of the crease, but he had his toes. He backed in a little bit too far. And that's the difference. You give a guy an extra 3 or 4 inches of opening, and, NHL players are going to hit that. And it was really unique listening to that aspect. Didn't make an excuse, just said, hey, this is how it was. And, it's been interesting. We got Doug Waite coming on Wednesday. And, I think we got Darian Hatcher, who Oiler fans, I think what's interesting is the players that you hate, you almost really enjoy listening to them this many years later. I find, Oiler fans used to hate Steve Ott till he came on my show all the time, and then they loved him just because he was a fun personality. And it'll be interesting to have Darian Hatcher. I know he had an illness in the family last week, so that's why I wasn't on. But when we connect with him, I'm very curious, because that guy, he was probably one of the dirtiest, most physical defensemen of his era.
The only guy we ever had, and you could probably correct me on this, there's probably others, but the only guy who ever played or suited up for the Oilers who beat up guys like that was Chris Pronger. Like, when you get a guy of that stature who plays that hard in front of the net, if he's on your team, you love him. But when he's opposing all your players, man, it's tough.
Yeah, the Oilers had like Craig Muni and Brian Marchment were those guys. They walked the line of dirty, no question about it, with the submarine hits. And, opposing guys hated them, but you loved them on your team. And I remember, like, Struddy was telling us when they went against Brian Marchment, every guy in the room before the game was like, be aware of Marchment, right? And it was constant reminder. And he still got guys, because even though, they would yell from the bench, Marchment's on the ice, just because he was, Hatcher was more mean, aggressive, in your face all the time. But Marchment and Muni were pretty dirty. You're right on Pronger. Pronger could get away with cross checks to borderline to the neck and upper sometimes in the face, and slashing and cross checking. And now you can't really play that way in front of the net. It's probably a good thing.
Probably a good thing.
But there were very few guys, and when you played like that, like I remember talking to Richard Matvichuk last week, and he said the thing about Smith that they respected so much was it didn't matter what you did. He would come back the next shift. And a lot of guys wouldn't, right? Like, you could tell as a player, just like in real life, when you can get in a guy's head and intimidate them. And Smith's strength was, he was unreal in front of the net, tipping pucks, et cetera. But he was incredibly talented at never showing a weakness that he was beat up. Even if he never showed it. And I think at times that would get into the head of the defense.
Yeah, he was a warrior. I loved watching Smitty play. But the purpose of having you on today, as much as I love talking sports, is I love hearing guys' stories. And I actually listened to you and Dean Millard, which you did, I think, about a month ago. And it was interesting to listen to that, because at the time the Oilers are in the playoff hunt. They're you're almost talking about Battle of Alberta and whether it's going to happen or not, which you said for some reason it won't happen. And I had to chuckle because, of course, now where we sit, it looks like Oilers Flames fans are going to have to wait at least another year. But what I want to know is I've listened to you a long time, really enjoy your thoughts and perspectives and your show in general. And I'm always curious on how a guy gets to where he is. And a year ago, almost to the day, I had Morgan and Merv Mann on, who are two Lloyd guys.
I know both of them. Morg played with my brother Colin and Acadia. Right. We're actually, Morg was in my brother's wedding party. They're beauty guys.
Well, and as soon as I finished with them, they said, a guy you should get on is Jason Gregor. And I said, I'd love to have him on. And then they started telling me a bit of your story, and I was like, holy shit. Like, I didn't know that's how that worked, or you could even do that. And so for the listeners who don't know, you're a guy who buys your airtime and then does pretty much everything. And before we get to that, I was hoping we could maybe go back to the start, because it wasn't like at 17 you walked in, started on the radio, and then, and worked your way that way. You got a little bit different of a story, and I was hoping we could maybe start a little closer to the start and just kind of trace your steps on how you get to where you currently are.
Yeah, it's definitely not a unique, it's pretty unique path, but everybody has their own path on success. And so for me, I was always, I think my mom's highly educated. And so in our household, we used to read the paper every day. My brother and I, and of course I think I was 9 when I started reading the paper every day. And we'd kind of debate, whoever got up first would get the sports section, right? Like sports and comics were pretty much all I wanted to read. Every now and then your mom would make you take section B, I think, in the journal, and you read about the city or something else. And it was like, shoot me until I got to the sports section. And, back then there was no internet growing up. So I would read the sports section sometimes 3 times a day and just absorb as many stats. I have a really good memory, and, I could just remember a lot of those stats. And, for people who grew up, I don't know if you read the journal, but Tuesday used to be the big day, because that's when they would bring out all the stats from the NHL and every team and every player. And I would just read those all the time. I used to cut them out and keep them and just kind of memorize them. It was a fun thing for me. And so sports is what I always wanted to do, but I played in the jungle, just junior B hockey. I was never a great hockey player. I liked it.
Who did you play for in the jungle?
Beaumont, and then Leduc, and then we won with Leduc. We actually lost to Lloyd in the provincial final in overtime in 93, I think it was, after winning in 92. So that kind of sucked, but it was, it doesn't matter what level you're at. You never forget that. And so I finished up playing hockey. I was 21. And I'd been working in the oil field at the time, and I just kind of stayed there. I didn't, I always wanted to do sports, but I think I was young, a little immature at that time, really, and was having fun. So, worked in the oil field, made some money, had a lot of fun. I partied with my buddies. Basically, that was it. I was a single guy. And just one day I was working in Killam, Alberta. And at that point, I'd ran my own unit for years. So when you ran your own unit, you got to stay in your own room. But in the summertime, when it would slow down, they would put 4 operators on a job, and you had to share a room. And I ended up having to share a room with this guy, Jason Beattie. And I'd never met any human being in my life who snored like that guy. And literally the second night, I couldn't sleep all night. Finally, I had to take the duvet off the bed, went into the bathroom, rolled it up like a sleeping bag under the sink, and I laid down to go to sleep. And I just laid there. I remember looking up and saying, man, there's got to be more to life than this. Like, this is not what I want to be. And literally, we got back in town 2 days later, and I called my mom and said, hey, I want to go into radio. How do I do it? My mom was, she's like, well, she looked it up. She was the educated one and said, hey, this is what you got to do. So I actually applied at NAIT, and I had to go through college prep courses. I had to upgrade. Like, it was pretty competitive. So they recommended you had an 80 average, and I think I had like a 72. So I had to upgrade a few classes, which is kind of humbling when you're 26, 27, you go back to school, and you're really in there with a bunch of 18 and 19-year-olds. And it's funny, the difference you have when you have life experience at 26 and 7. And, I just knew a lot of stuff like social studies. And so it wasn't that I was smarter. I just had more life experience. And then I got in the program, and it kind of just took off. I lucked out in my 3rd semester. A guy got let go, and I grew up listening to John Short. I don't know if you know who John is, but he was kind of like a legend of mine growing up.
Yeah, big broadcaster. Before I got to slow you down just a smidge here. I'm curious. You work in the oil patch for a long time, and at that time when you're quitting would have been the heyday, the start of the heyday. You must have been. Where were you working at the time?
I was working at Premium Oilfield Inspection. I was doing downhole ultrasonic testing on downhole drill pipe.
Okay. And
Ran-
at the time, so you're working in the oil patch. Were you doing radio things at all, or
no, nothing.
was
Literally, the only thing I read both papers every day. Like the guys on the road always laughed because I would buy the Journal and the Sun, and I would read everything. Just I wanted, I felt like that was the way to keep my brain active, because doing ultrasonic testing, it was pretty boring at times. You're doing all the drill pipe, you got your little machine and you're on the pipe and you're just hoping for a crack or something so you can feel like you're working. But I have an ultimate respect for oil field guys. A lot of my family's in there, and it can be a tough job when you have to put in repetitive hour after hour and not much is really happening, right? So you got to stay sharp just in case. So that's what I was doing, and I went back to school in 1999, 2000. Yeah, 2000 January is when I started the program, but 1999 in September is when I went into college prep courses at Maine.
So when you're after you've been under the sink and you're laying there and you're going, there's more to life. You're driving home and you're thinking, whatever you're thinking. Why radio then? Was it something that you've always wanted to do? You talk about reading the paper a ton. Like, did you want to write? Your mom's wrote books, has she not?
Yeah, my mom, she's unreal. Yeah, she wrote 3 books in her 70s. So, and she wrote a book probably when she was 45 or 52. So she's amazing. But you know what? Radio was something I always wanted. I've always had a gift of the gab in my family. I emceed probably tons of my friends' weddings growing up before I was ever in radio. That's just something I was good at talking and telling stories. So, you know what? I listened to John. I remember my late father and I coming home from hockey games, listening to sports talk radio religiously every night.
Yeah, yeah.
So that's something I always wanted to do. And I talked about it and I just never did it. And, I look back and it wasn't the right time for me. And so when I went in, you need a little bit of luck, and sure, I got some luck by being able to work with John, but, then hard work, like in any occupation. I think the most successful people in whatever walk of life are the ones who usually work the hardest.
Well, and you are doing a ton. Like, I mean, I always point out your show, but I mean, on top of your show, you do, you write for Oilers Nation,
yeah.
Right? I always enjoyed, and I'm curious on the story on how your charity got started with Gregor's Grads. You do a ton there. With all the different charities you work with, actually. I mean, like, it's always, when I listen to you, I always go, man, it's impressive. Everybody always talks about being busy, and then I listen to guys like you, and I go, man, that guy has got to be busy. So when I sent the email to get you on my show, I go, it's probably a hope in hell he comes on. And then you email back, and I'm like, oh, I guess he's got, a guy who never seems to sleep.
Yeah. Well, I actually get, it's probably had the best 2 weeks of sleep of my life because there's not much going on right now. But I grew up on a farm in New Sarepta. I think you got a work ethic from being on the farm. Like when you got up in the morning, there was always something to do. And so you just did it. You didn't really have a choice in the matter as a kid sometimes. As a teenager, I didn't really love it, but that's kind of how it was. If you lived on the farm, you had to do the work. And so I think I'm a hyper guy a little bit. So I like to be on the go. I like to do a lot of things. Hosting my show is kind of the easy part of the day for me. I've been doing it now for 19 years. It's fun. I like it. The writing at Oilers Nation, they approached me back in 2007 and they wanted me to write, and they started the company. And at that point I'd owned my show now for 3 years. And once you become self-employed, I wanted to have a say. So I said, well, guys, can I buy in at 20%? So they were kind of stunned. They were like, you serious? I'm like, well, yeah, if I'm going to be in on it, I want to be invested. And there's no better way to show someone you're invested by putting money where your mouth is. So I bought in. And so now I'm part owner of the Nation Network. And, my buddies Clark and Jay are much more of the internet savvy guys, right? I can talk content and help out with that. And it's, now we own hockeyfights.com and Daily Face Off and, NHL Numbers and all those different sites that are part of it in Calgary and Toronto and Vancouver. So it's, it's been interesting to learn. I'm more in the content and just writing side of things, but that's just fun. I like it. I like learning different things. The charity thing was, my father grew up fairly poor in his household. They didn't have a lot. And I remember my dad talking about it as a kid. And, you know, my dad was never one for lectures. I never, you know, big speech father or anything, but you just kind of learn sometimes from watching. And my dad was always very willing to want to, like in our household, he never bought anything for himself. He made sure my mom always had the newer car. You know, in the 80s when the oil collapse happened, my dad literally didn't buy a new pair of pants for 3 years. My mom used to just sew patches on his jeans, and he didn't care, right? Because he grew up really poor. And he never said that, but I remember those stories. And, you know, my dad always talked about, you got to help other people. So I kind of stumbled into the charity thing on my show one year when I decided, oh, we'll start a month of giving to see if we can raise some money for Santa's Anonymous and the Christmas Bureau. And, you know, my goal was to raise 25 grand that month, and we ended up raising 55. And I was like, wow. And so it just kind of came on. And, you know, my audience is I think most people genuinely want to help others. They need to be reminded who, and people trust me now. I do a lot of research on which charities we work with, because I want charities that have a low administration fee. So you know that the money's going to the people who need it. It's not going to someone to have a job. And I think that's important. And then when I started my own foundation, that happened in 2013. And for people who don't know, Gregor's Grads, we supply suits for high school boys who can't afford one. And it's a new suit, shirt, tie, shoes. We get them all professionally fitted at Mr. Dirk's. They're a big sponsor. And you know what? I can tell you of all the things that I do, it's a lot of work to organize that with the schools, but they're great. But when you get to see a young 17-year-old kid and he stands in front of the mirror the first time with the suit on, man, it's amazing. So it's a lot of fun. It still chokes me up just talking about it.
How many boys do you give suits to each year?
Well, the first year was 36, and last year we did 125, and this year we had 140. Then of course COVID hit, and so now there might not be grads. And ATV Financial has stepped up; they're a big title sponsor now, which is awesome, as well as Mr. Dirk. So you know, you got to, because we do a lot of fundraising. I raise all the money myself, and it costs about on average $270. We get really good deals on a new suit with shirt and tie and shoes. And you know, the counselors at the schools are the ones who kind of nominate the kids. They know which kids are and which families are in dire need. And, you know, you get some pretty cool pictures. That's the only thing I ask. We never put the kids' names out there. But all I ask them is they send me a picture on grad day of just so you can see them in their suit. And they're always pretty fired up.
Yeah, well, that's, you know, I was telling my wife, I was explaining, my wife is from Minneapolis. Okay. She, until I met her, even though they're in the hockey state, had been to 0 hockey games. You can imagine her now. She's shaking her head living in Lloydminster. And I'm telling her who I got coming on tomorrow. And, you know, I'm pretty excited about it. And I was explaining some of the things that you do. And I brought up Gregor's Grads. And she's like, well, what's that? And I'm telling her about it. She goes, that's something very unique. You don't hear that very often. And, you know, when I first heard you talk about it on air, probably a couple of years ago, I was like, man, that's kind of cool. And at the time I didn't realize how many boys that is, but like, that's a lot. 140, you say. I mean, and that number probably continue to go up as it gets more successful, but kudos to you for doing stuff like that. The world needs more of that. Like that's really cool.
Oh, I appreciate it. Like you know, when I got the idea from Cinderella's Closet, they provided it for girls. And now it's a little bit different because, you know, we learned the hard way that I guess with dresses, you can take a size 10 dress and alter it to fit a size 3 or 4. You can't really take a size 40 suit and alter it to fit a 36, right? It doesn't work. We learned that the hard way because the first year we did it, we were just taking donations. And so we had lots of listeners, like Page Cleaners had volunteered and offered to dry clean all the stuff. So people were dropping it off. We had 300 suits. And now I had to get rid of some of them. You know, some people gave suits from like the 70s, and I'm like, okay, we're not going to. But we actually had some really nice suits, Hugo Boss and stuff. But we learned that the fittings, and luckily we only had 36 kids because it was a stretch. We ended up having to buy some suits because most of the suits were donated were size 40 to 44 because they're from men. But these are high school boys, and you know, some of them are wearing a 34 or a 36, and you just couldn't alter it down to fit. So after that, I sat down and just said, okay, I got to raise the money, and we can get a new suit. They can keep it. It's a lot easier, and now we do it at Mr. Dirk. So when the boys come in, like they feel like any grad. They come in, they're professionally fitted by the staff at Mr. Dirk, and we've now done it for the last 5 years. So you know, it's like an assembly line. They're really good. And it's just awesome to see the kids when they step out of the change room, they stand in front of the mirror, because none of them have ever had a suit before. And I don't care, you're a grown man. Every time you get a new suit, you're looking in the mirror like, hey, what's happening? You know, you're strutting to your wife or your girlfriend, and it's no different for your 17-year-old boy.
There's something about looking good.
Oh, 100%.
Right? And new threads are the best, right? I laugh about your dad's story about wearing the same jeans for 3 years, because I grew up on a farm, and I could just, that's the way you're kind of wired out there, right? And a little dirt on it or whatever, you got a hole, whoop-de-doo, right? I mean, fencing, I mean, if you fenced, like, holes are just part of the game. I mean,
if you don't have cuts on your arms or your hands, even if you're wearing gloves after fencing, you probably haven't tightened the wire tight enough.
I gotta be the demographic out here will love the farming chat, but the fencing, I'm a guy who can't. I have to have a bare hand for the staple. Yeah. I can't do it with glove. So I don't know how many times as a kid you smack your hand. A couple of choice words. It was one of the places Dad. I'll get Dad in crap for this. Mom and him will listen to this. But it was one of the places in the entire world where we could swear when you did something stupid like that, right? And he'd just look over and he wouldn't say anything because, I mean, he's done it. It hurts like hell, and you carry on with life, right? But going back to the tuxes, I mean, even now, you said it right. A grown-ass man, you get a new suit, there ain't nothing better. And at that time in their life on, now we're both older, but at that point when you're graduating, that's a big time in your life, like a huge achievement. And at the time you think there's going to be nothing bigger in life. And, to get something so you can be a part of it and feel a part of it and actually like stand up tall, like that's it could be, life altering almost.
Well, we've received a lot of emails from boys saying, hey, thank you. And, a lot of them will, because when I sit down, we tell them, we purposely at Dirk's, they fit them, the jacket, so it fits, but they leave an inseam in the back. So, you're 17, by the time you're 20, maybe your shoulders broaden out a bit. They can just take it back to a tailor and let it out. So, a good 1.5 inches. Now, unless you have a massive growth spurt, then maybe it'll be too tight. But, a lot of them can keep these suits for 5-6 years, depending on how much they grow. And, I tell them, hey, keep this for it's yours to keep, which usually shocks them. A lot of them think it's kind of a rental, but it's theirs to keep. And they can use it we've had a few kids that email on the side, hey, I got a job, and I think I only got the job because of my suit. And that's great to hear. And I always tell them, I said, the suit didn't get you the job. The suit just gave you confidence so they would see who you are as a person. And really, that's all it's doing.
Super cool. Like I say, really cool that you do that. It's another reason I'm a huge fan of yours, is just some of the community aspects that you put into your show is just awesome. I want to get to your show before, I constantly looking at the time and I see the
Don't worry, I got a lot of time. My show's all prepped for today.
Perfect. Well, one of the very interesting things that I learned about you last year when I was talking with the Mann brothers is that you buy your airtime and then do everything. And I was curious, like, is that something that happens in all radio, or are you very unique to you? I know when you talked about John Short, when I listened to you and Millard talk about it, that's a guy who did that. That's how I assume you learned it. And I guess me just being dumb, I just assumed you're an employee and you just showed up and you lined up your guests and whatever else. So maybe we could just dive into that a little bit.
Sure. Well, John hadn't always done that, but he did it later in his career, back at but then was Oldies 1260. So it was an oldie station. And then from 9 to midnight, he would rent his airtime, and they had Bob Suter was his sales guy, and they would go out and make sales. And so John was doing his show at Northlands, the racetrack, every night. And that's when I started working for him. I was in my 3rd year semester at school, and they just needed somebody to be the on-site producer, because John, was technically inept. He jokes about it. He's like, dude, you can't teach a 70-year-old how to all of a sudden run the internet. Like, I can barely turn on a computer, you joke. So I'd have to be on site and printing off all the stories, because the internet, this was still in, 2000. So it was the early stages. There wasn't, the massive amounts of sites with information. There was like a CP, and it had all the stories, and you would search through and then print them off and talk to them. So that's kind of how I got started. And luckily for me, you need a break. Rob Kerr, who was the regular guy, got sick. pretty sick. So I hosted, I filled in every night for a month while I was in school. And that just, after I was supposed to do my practicum at Ched, and John was like, well, why aren't you doing it with me? And I was like, I didn't think that was an option because, you know, like he was in his own show. He's like, no, you can do it. So I was like, great. So I did it with John, and I started covering the Eskimos, kind of like a beat reporter, and producing a show. And then after my practicum was done, he said, well, hey, we'd like to hire you, but like, you got to learn how to do sales. And I was like, what? Like, I'd never sold anything in my life. You know, sales job's tough. And so I kind of learned a little bit how that was. And so we did that for a few years. In the meantime, I had a break. We went to CJACA, where I was actually employee of the station for a year and a half. And that was okay, but it was a religious station with a sports show. And ultimately that wasn't good. So, you know, it's kind of one of those just little odd parts of your journey in life. And then we went back to Team 1260 started in 2004. And we worked there for about 8 months. And I was starting to get pretty good at sales. And my show at that point was 11 p.m. till 1 a.m. And John was 9 till 11. So we would buy a 4-hour block. And all the sales were going into one pot. And I was starting to get good at sales, but I was really getting such a small commission. It wasn't like, I'm like, I got to make some money here. You got to remember, I'm like now 32 years of age. And I'm like, this is, you know, I got to make some money or else I got to quit. Like, can't do anything. So I went to John and said, hey, do you mind if I just separate my show? You take your 2 hours, I'll take my 2 hours. And he said, sure. So I went to the station. I talked to, at that point, Carl Stark and Marty Forbes. And I said, hey guys, it's my plan. They're like, and they knew me now for a year. And they're like, okay. So all the sponsors I had at that time, Blue Sky Limos, Boston Pizza, a few other ones, Capilano Rehab and others, I took them. And that was 11 p.m. till 1 a.m. And Kia West Edmonton was a car dealership that I had. And I just kind of started from that. And I worked that for a year. And then John left to the afternoon. He was getting older and tired. And then I went from 9 to midnight, and I owned 3 hours and just would sell. I did all the sales for my show.
How was doing 11 to 1 every night?
Buddy, that was you got to remember, usually you would go to Lloydminster or other small markets in Saskatchewan and start. But so I kind of looked at it like I started on CJACA, which was a Christian station. So it wasn't like it was a massive market, but you're in a major market in a small market station is how I looked at it. So I got to cover, you know, the Oilers, the Roadrunners, the Eskimos. So you got to cover major league teams, but I was a newbie. Like, you know, it was a good way to learn. You can make mistakes at 11 p.m. and, you know, you're not going to get ripped on it as much because your audience is just smaller. And then it just kind of grew your audience at night. And so it was fun. Like, and you could get away with anything really at 11. Like, you know, there wasn't a lot of CRTC regulation. Not that I ever swore anything, but you know, you could have some pretty zany segments and stuff. And then it kind of grew from there. But you know, it's funny, like 11 p.m. to me was like, that was my first time. The time didn't care to me. It was just like, I'm talking into the radio, I'm doing what I love. And it was for 2 hours. And, you know, I always tell people, it doesn't matter how many people are listening. If you want to get better, you're just going to work on your craft, not because you got 10 listeners or 20,000 listeners.
That's right.
It's just the only way you'll get to 20,000 is if you take the time at that point to get better. And so I got to learn kind of through my mistakes.
Well, and I was going to say, you know, you said you'd never done sales before. And I think anytime you hop behind the mic, whether you realize it or not, you're selling yourself, right? And you're trying to get, you know, and if you're no different, right? If you sucked, I wouldn't listen to you, right? And if other guys, you know, I love when you have Ray Ferraro on. Like, that guy is excellent. And if people like that weren't good, you wouldn't tune in. And it's not that hard now with technology, and I mean podcasts and everything else. You can listen to anyone wherever you want to from the other side of the world. You know, you got more options than ever before. It isn't back like when I was growing up. You tuned into, you know, your 2 or 3 radio. Well, heck, 2 or 3. We probably had one radio station in Lloyd, and then you listen to 630 Ched for the Oilers games, and I mean a couple other little stations, and that was it. Right. And now the options are endless. Yeah,
no, they definitely are. The world has changed and evolved. And, you know, a lot of people thought the radio would die when the internet came in. And, you know, people thought radio would change with podcasting. And, you know, I know what works for my audience. And you know, like your brother, not everyone's going to like your show, and that's totally okay. If, like I've always said, if everybody likes the host, then you're not opinionated enough, because or you're not making a strong stance on something. And, you know, the best compliment is, yeah, I hate your show, Gregor, but they listen and they know everything about it. I'm like, okay, good. Like that's just as good as if you love the show, as long as you're listening. And, You know, when it comes to advertisers, it's definitely competitive. And to me, sales, you know, could I stand up and get a sales seminar? I don't know. I actually did one once. And to me, I was always like, sales is just straight honesty. You have to tell, okay, this is my show. This is who my audience is. This is what I think you're going to do. And the advantage of being the host of the show is when you tell a client, you know what, hey, I can do bonus mentions for you, me talking about your product, they know it's true because I host a show. So that's kind of the advantage. And, you know, I'm lucky. A lot of my clients, I like to build long-term partnerships. I want clients that are going to have success, ones that my audience will respect. And so I pick clients, you know, like, because you're right, like the Jason Gregor Show is essentially me. If it sucks, it's not TSN, it's Jason Gregor. So I have to make sure that, you know, my audience and my advertisers feel that the show is respected.
Going back to buying the airtime, then, is that what all shows are doing, or is that unique just to you?
Yeah, that's just me. Now there's guys who have like a once a week show that will do that. But as far as, you know, I have 20 hours a week now. I've had 20 hours a week since 2008. Really the only guy in the country who does that. And it's, you know, and I'm lucky. Like I have a really good partner with TSN, you know, and Bell Media. They're awesome that we do it. And, you know, it's been a relationship that works well for all parties. And, you know, hopefully it can continue for a long time.
Yeah, it's well, like I say, when I first heard that, I went, huh. I just would have never thought that that you could buy airtime. And I mean, as a newbie into the industry, even with a year in, when you're back working the late nights, it's pretty cool move to, like, you know, have the gumption to sink in and go all in on something like that.
Yeah. You know, it's funny in sports. They always say, you know, the young players didn't know the pressure they were in the playoffs because they're just naive enough. And honestly, I think for me, it was, you know, luckily I grew up, I had support from my parents my entire life. They loved all three of their kids. And, you know, you get confidence when you just have belief. And so when I wanted to start my company in 2005, you know, I went to my mom and, you know, like we sat down literally with an Excel spreadsheet and said, okay, this is what I have to pay the station. That's in this column. Well, this is what I got to pay myself. Will Fraser was my producer. So we got to pay guys. So this is how much I need. So I got to have this much coming in minimum. And that's really how it started. And my mom gave me a $5,000 loan at the time just to see it. And I was like, hey, you know, I'll pay it back in a year. And, you know, things went way better than I expected. You know, I got to pay her back within like 2 months. And the best thing I ever did was Paul Hockey was somebody who was coaching the U of A Ringette club. And they were an independent club. They weren't part of the U of A. It was Ringette, and it was kind of starting out. And so I had emceed their event, and he was an accountant. I sat down talking to Paul what I'm doing. He's like, well, you need an accountant. He says, I'll be your accountant. And so he gave me the best advice on how to start a company properly. And I look back on that, and that's, you know, the finances behind the scenes of any company are really what's going to make or break. Because Paul said this, he goes, it's not how much money you make, it's how much money you're saving as a company over time. And, you know, make sure you're paying your taxes, like things like I never knew about CRA and corporate tax and GST and all these other things that you know, so, and I'm kind of like, if someone gives me direction, I can be a good listener. And he was like, you got to make sure you're separating your things that are, you can use as expenses. And he always said, do everything legally. Don't try to, when if somebody tell, yeah, well, my accountants give me loopholes. He goes, there's no such thing as a loophole. It's legal or illegal. There's nothing in between. And there are legal things that can benefit a company, but it's not a loophole. It's just a legal thing. Anything that's a loophole is probably illegal. You can do it, but if you get caught, then you're screwed, right? And so that probably is, when I look back at my business, having Paul and just having guys to support you in areas that you have no expertise on made such a huge difference.
When you look back now, because you've been pretty much in it for 20 years almost.
Yeah.
What's maybe one of the blunders you made where you go back and you go, man, if I could have talked to myself at 30, this is maybe one of the things I would have told myself so I don't make that mistake again?
That's a good one. Really, it's probably, you know, arguing with trolls on Twitter. You know, I wasted a lot of my life early on when it came on about that. And you're just like, what are you doing? It just cause you a lot of grief for no reason. So that would be the big one. But from a business standpoint, like I didn't really know much. So it was all learning. And I got lucky along the way. Like I had some good mentors. A gentleman, Jim Mones, was somebody who I used to just talk about business stuff, because no one in my family, like my dad, you know, he didn't even grow up on a farm, but he ended up being like a business farmer really, but not, you know, not in a business standpoint. My mom was highly educated, but didn't have a, you know, business per se. But you know, now the farm's kind of like a business for her, and she runs her own books and everything. So you can kind of evolve, but it was really, you know, the business side was just learning. I think more of my mistakes came on air and, you know, in certain segments that I would try that bombed and things like that you learn. But that's kind of part of the process of being a host. You're going to have some stuff that you just look back and say, man, that was terrible.
What was a bad segment you tried?
Well, this was at nighttime in 2000 and, oh God, maybe it's during the lockout. And for about a month, we tried a segment every night where we were going to reenact the game. And it was awful. Like looking back on it, because I still have some tapes on it. And it was so dumb because like we literally tried like a 5-minute segment pretending it was a 60-minute game, right? And doing play-by-play on it. And it was awful. Like it's so bad. And you're just, you know, but thankfully it was at night, and, you know, thankfully there's no recording. I do have a few of them, but I would never publicize it. It was just like, what were you thinking, right? Like, and the play-by-play wasn't that good. Like I was doing Alberta Junior Hockey League playoffs at the time. Like I've been in Lloydminster and Bonnyville many times doing games at anysportanytime.com back in the early 2000s. And, you know, and I love doing those games, but trying to have a make-believe game was not ideal radio.
I got to ask, how did you come up with that idea?
Well, you know, it's a lockout. I never experienced a lockout to host, and you're just
I gotcha.
What am I going to do here, right? Like it was a little nerve-wracking. Like thankfully at that time there was basketball and other sports, so you could at least, because, you know, I was always a sports fan, not just a hockey fan. I've been like, luckily I got to do play-by-play for lacrosse for 10 years and really introduced me to that game, and I love it. And, you know, football, I've always been a football fan, and basketball. And, you know, I was a huge baseball fan growing up, not so much anymore, but I was when I was younger. And so luckily they had those sports, like, so that, but when hockey was still your main thing in Canada. So it was more so out of fear of thinking, well, I got to have a hockey segment somehow. And then I realized, you know what? People don't care. Like there was so much anger around it that fans are just so frustrated that they're going to miss hockey for a year over people arguing over millions of dollars that no one could really relate to. So finally I just scrapped it. I was like, this is not, I don't think this is relating to the audience. If anything, it's alienating.
What, with all that's going on right now, the Summer Olympics just getting bumped back again, do you think there's any opportunity you see any form of playoffs come back? Like, is there any chance the NHL does a March Madness style, does a best of 3, does 24 teams get it? And I mean, the idea is, we always joke around here, man, would it be to be a fly on the wall in the NHL conference room to hear what they're talking about? Like, is there any possibility? And I know there's so many unknowns with, you know, just what's going on right now. Nobody can say if this is going to last 2 weeks, but is there a chance they can somehow formulate? And I mean, you can do NHL or you can do, you know, NBA for all I care.
I think it's going to be challenging based on now there's two things here. Can they have playoffs without fans? I think that's very possible, right? You could get to a point now that, you know, the scientists here, like, it's amazing to see how quickly science can evolve. And, you know, I've always been one, I don't really question scientists. Like, they do years and years of studies on things, and usually it's like, believe the scientists, you know, don't believe a guy who used to be Celebrity Apprentice host because he has no clue what he's talking about when it comes to science. But you look at, you know, when they say, okay, you know, and Canada, you even look at the numbers compared to other countries. We've done a pretty good job of you know, social distancing, and, you know, our numbers are relatively low, but that could still go up here in the next few weeks. And then, because they say it takes 2 weeks to really see a difference, but so far I think we've done a fairly admirable job considering, you know, what everybody else is doing. The thing for the NHL and the NBA is the United States is on a totally different level. Like, their cases, and granted, they're 10 times big as us, their cases are growing significantly.
Exponentially.
And so the NHL in Canada, you might be able to have things clear in some of our cities, but I'm not sure, you know, all of them in the US are going to be that way. So I think right now, And maybe I'm telling myself worst case scenario because then it's easier to accept it. But I'm like, I would be very surprised. And the other thing is, from a business standpoint, the NHL has already been on record. They don't want to shorten next season because that's when you look at a business, that's where they make their most money. They have 1,271 game nights, and there's tons of revenue from tickets to merchandise to beer and food to parking. So if you suddenly limit that to even, let's say, a 70-game season, well, now you're cutting out 180 plus games. The NHL playoffs only average 88 games, and they don't make double the revenue, right, in those 88 games. They don't, because you're not doubling your ticket price, you're not doubling your beer price, you're not doubling your merchandise price. So you still only have, on average, 88 playoff games over the last 5 years. So they don't want to limit next year because now they're catching up again. And to me, the most fascinating part of the NHL for next season for me is what's going to happen in the salary cap, because you've lost now the final 171 NHL regular season games, plus the 88 on average, let's say, in the playoffs. So we're talking now 14, 15% of your revenue. I don't see how the salary cap goes up. I don't see how it doesn't go down. And so how can it go down at the current rate it's at? Because most teams don't have any cap space. I could see them having, the players might have to, they're going to have a bigger chunk of escrow moving forward, right? Like significant chunks of it. And that's the only way I think they're going to be able to get by without a significant drop. Because if I'm a player, I don't want to do what happened in 2005 where they just cut salary. Remember, it was 24%. So if you had a 4-year deal, 24% of your salary over 4 years was cut instantly. So a guy like Leon Draisaitl, for argument's sake, or McDavid, right? They got 6 and 7 years left on their deals. If they have and sure, they're making millions, so it's not like it's going to cost them in life, but it'll cost them money. But if you do a 24% rollback, as a player, you'd probably rather bet on escrow, because let's say this first year it's 30%, but if everything recovers, well, next year might be 12, and then next year might be 10, rather than a straight 25 for 7 years. So I think the players might have to bite the bullet on escrow, and that's the way that, everybody's making less. Because I think the NHL and every pro league, Shaun, is going to be, there needs to be a reset in the sports world. Like, it's $50 million to play basketball for superstars, 30, 40 million in NFL and Major League Baseball, 12, 10, 9 million in hockey. Like, it's just, it's an unnecessary amount of money for one individual to make. Like, I love sports. I love it. But if you're telling me the best player made $5 million a year, no fan's going to be upset about that. It's $5 million a year, right? And if the bottom feeder guy's making $500,000, like, think about, what is it? I think 10% of Canadians make over $60,000 a year. So, I think sports, the stock market resets all the time. At some point, the sporting world, I thought, was going to be in for a reset, and this might be the start of it.
Man, that filtered down quick too, wouldn't it? Like, yeah. You just think you're in the scene, right? To go to an Oiler game right now, I love the Oilers, but I got as my kids get older, I got 3 kids under 4 right now, which are, you can imagine. And you can imagine being self-isolating with that. It's interesting. But when you look at going to an Oiler game, specifically from Lloyd, I mean, that is one expensive night. And I love the Oilers, but you argue with yourself on where it's almost just easier to flick it on the TV and have a cold Pilsner and relax on your couch and not have to worry. And I love going to an Oiler game. If you had where it reset and now maybe prices come down, geez, that would, I bet you that would be healthy for even the fan base.
Oh, without question. I think, as ticket prices were going, like, you looked at this year, and number one, just the amount of season tickets that dropped, right? From people were tired of supporting a losing organization. They just were, right? And there's lots of markets that are like that. But then you put in the cost factor. Like, I know so many people who canceled their season tickets and said, man, I could go to 10 games a year. I could wait till an hour before the game and buy it online for 3/4 of the price of what it used to be, half the price, 25%. And I don't, like, definitely now, if there's no playoffs this year, there isn't that emotional reconnection. If anything, most fans are going to, because no one knows what our financial situation will be. A lot of people are looking at 10, 20, 40% rebates in their own money coming in. So that's even less disposable income. Like, I think a lot of teams are going to have a massive, if they want people in the building, they're going to have to look hard in the mirror and reset. And I think pro sports, because I understand it, once you get used to a certain level of money coming in, you don't want to have a 15, 30, 40% rebate in your ticket sales just to get people in the building. But that's realistic. Like if this COVID situation has us 3-4 months where basically the economy is on pause or creeping along slowly, people aren't going to have when like you're a father of 3. Do I get my kids clothes or do I get them school supplies? It's a no-brainer what you're doing.
Yeah. Yeah. And Alberta specifically is in a different, we've been battling with
Oil.
economy here for, geez, man, it's been probably 5 years now. It just seems, well, I was just talking with a friend earlier this morning, actually, right? Like the COVID crisis right now for a lot of the world is suffocating. But for Alberta specifically, it's just another thing in the long list of things that's happened over the last 5 years where you just keep getting, we get kicked, we get knocked down, you stand back up, you carry on, you find a different way to do it, and then you get dropped again and you carry on. And, we've been dropped, like I say, probably 4 or 5 times. It's just become the new norm where things are not going to be great again for the foreseeable future.
Yeah, it's one where it sounds strange, but Albertans' perseverance might be better than some other places because we've had to deal with like significant adversity. Well, you go back to your parents, I was a young kid in the 80s and, I'm 24% interest. You talk to anybody who lived that, like think about 24% mortgage on your, like, that's just people were walking away from their houses, but they persevered and they went again. And, we've had the massive ebb and flows of oil field. And that's just the reality of Alberta. And, hopefully we find different avenues, which I think we are slowly, but it's hard to change and we still need it. Like oil is hugely important for the world. Like all these people that try, and Canada is one of the leaders at doing it clean. I don't want to get on an oil rant, but trust me, like you want to get me fired up. We can talk about these people trying to suggest that Canada and Alberta specifically, we do it cleaner than anyone. And our own country doesn't support us, which is mind blowing. But anyway, I think our ability have shown to get back up repeatedly is going to help us through it. And the toughness and mental perseverance of humans, when no one wants to deal with the crisis, it sucks, it's scared, it's stressful, but we've proven historically time and time again, we can come out of it and we will. It just, things will look a little bit different.
Yeah. When you go back through even the last 100 years, there's been some pretty bad epidemics come through this area. I mean, in the world in general, yeah. Right? And I love history. And I'd had a note passed along from my mother looking at Kelowna, and there was a note come out back in 1918 about the Spanish flu coming through, and, gatherings weren't supposed to be 10 people or less, and they were shutting down the dance halls and the pool halls and all that stuff, right? So people have had to deal with this before, right? I mean, yeah. Like history is a funny thing. Every generation that comes kind of forgets a bunch about the previous, what they went through. And we're experiencing something that in, 20 years, 40 years, people are going to ask us about, like, was it really that bad? Was it really, and that's unique when you think about it, because that doesn't happen every single day.
No, Canada really in the grand scheme of the world is pretty lucky. We've never, we haven't had a lot of wars on our own soil where you saw the devastation personally. Anybody who's ever visited Europe, you go to Germany and you can see like, and that, we get into the psychology of generations and how that impacts 3-4 generations later. This is something that will definitely impact people. It's the first time someone's experienced like having to lose, and we're so lucky and freedom. And so what I've been doing in this to keep my mind sharp is I actually been reading books on people who persevere. And I just read a book. It's called Homes. It's written by a young kid who actually, I didn't know when I started the book, but he lives in Edmonton, Canada now.
Really?
He penned the book with his teacher when he was like 16. It was about his life living in Syria. And how they talk like, yeah, we're walking down the street and there's bombings 2 blocks away. And it's like, okay, run for shelter. Then the next day you're back out there. And so the human race can overcome a lot more than we think. Now we're losing a lot of like our abilities to socialize and go out and do things. And then obviously the financial restraints on people is going to be challenging, no question, but we'll get through it. It's going to be different. So I recommend, like, for me, I was reading that. I'm like, okay, you know what? Like, this is not the worst thing. He talked almost nonchalantly about people dying in the street because they would see it, and you almost become immune to it.
Immune to it, yeah.
It's kind of sad in a way, and he even talked about when he came to Canada, how for the first month it was really hard on him because he had quiet. There was no mortar, there was no bombings around, and to think that quiet can be a bad thing, it's just we always have to take everything in different perspectives.
Yeah, that's interesting. I'll have to check into that. And
yeah,
you
Holmes,
say it's Holmes?
Yeah, Holmes, Homes, because that was the neighborhood that he was from in Syria.
Oh wow, yeah, that's really intriguing.
It's an easy read. It's a small book, but it's really cool about a young Syrian. And he had 7 siblings, and his mom and dad, and they came over and didn't speak English and went to Highlands Elementary School in Edmonton. It's pretty cool.
I see we're at the hour mark, and I always try and stick to timelines because I know I'm a busy guy. I know you're an extremely busy guy. So at the end of my shows, I do the Crude Master Final 5. They're a sponsor that I have that's been with me since the start. So shout out to Heath and Tracy McDonald. It's just 5 questions. We can take as long or short as you like. The first one I have, going back to the NHL. If you look at the NHL this year, what team suffers the most from this season not being played out? And I always think of like maybe the Boston Bruins because, when you're that good, everybody always talks about windows of opportunity, right? What team do you think maybe missed out this year if they don't find a way to have playoffs?
Oh, it's a good question. Like if we're talking a team that was missing out on a potential championship, I think Tampa Bay. Tampa Bay made a lot of changes to their team. They got crushed last year in 4 straight to Columbus, and they'd made a lot of changes to be better. And I think their team had addressed their weaknesses. So I think Tampa Bay's up there. Boston's. For some reason, I don't know why it was. I felt Boston was a team that was ripe to not make it to the conference final. They probably could have won a round. I thought Tampa Bay was a deeper team than them this year. Tampa, remember, had a really slow start, and they got better. In the West, I really think the Pacific was wide open, right? Edmonton, Vegas, even Vancouver or Calgary. Anybody who got in could have easily won 2 rounds. And when you're talking Edmonton and Vancouver, who haven't had much playoff success in quite a long time, definitely in Edmonton 1 year, from a financial standpoint for their organization, I think those teams lost out. Like Calgary, Edmonton, Vancouver, teams that haven't had a lot of success, that emotional, like, oh my goodness, we're in the second, third round of the playoffs. And for season tickets, I think from a financial standpoint, those teams are going to lose significantly from this. And
just the possibility of a Battle of Alberta, I was too young to remember, I can't remember the glory days. I was born in 86. So the last time there was a Battle of Alberta, I was knee high.
Yeah, you're 5 years old. Yeah.
Right. And just to listen to the accounts and even watch some of the games, the film of it is just like, that's healthy. I had Trevor Redden on this. Well, actually it came out today while we're recording, and he's the voice of Prince Albert Raiders. Yeah. And the Raiders got to play Saskatoon in the conference finals to go to the league finals. And just hearing about how healthy that rivalry was, right, for both places.
Dude, I was there. My nephew played on the Raiders last year when they won.
Well, so that's right.
I was in PA, man. It was unbelievable experience, so fun, and for that rivalry to be back again was fantastic. And PA and Saskatoon could have met easily in the first round again this year.
Right, and that's healthy for organization, for fans, right? I got tons of buddies. My college roommate was a Calgary Flames. I went to northern Wisconsin and go all the way there, and my college roommate is a Calgary Flames fan. You think it followed me wherever I went. And to have the opportunity to have our 2 teams finally play each other with a lot on the line, lots of bragging rights, everything else. And then you wish it could happen. I think it'd be healthy for the province, in tough times to have sports to rally around.
Yeah, it would have been fantastic, honestly. I think, even Edmonton, Vancouver at this point would have been good. Yeah. But, Edmonton, Calgary would have been phenomenal. I think for a lot of people, it's funny, some Oilers fans be like, I don't want that because if they lose, I can't handle my Flames fans. And I'm like, dude, that's like a loser mentality to look at it. You look at it because you want to experience it, because it'll be, you talk about 97, you were 11 years old. It's the first time you really became like a diehard fan, because that's what the
right.
playoffs do. It's just different. So then 06 was for a lot of new people, 17 again. But if you would have had the Battle of Alberta, that would have been every generation of hockey fan in Alberta would have gotten back to their roots, whether it was people who had never experienced it the first time, because, unless you watch 91, you've never experienced it. And this regular season showed us that the animosity is coming. But at the playoffs, it would have just ramped up to a whole new level. And really for fans, like if your old college roommate, you guys would have been chirping each other all day over the phone.
We chirp each other all the time anyways, right? As fans, you love and hate that feeling, because in the playoffs, specifically the playoffs, if you're invested, you're a part of the roller coaster ride that is the playoffs. And so the joy of winning, but like the gut-wrenching pain of losing is just ramped up on a level that you don't normally experience. And for Oiler fans, we haven't, you talk about 2006, talk about 2017. We just didn't experience, we haven't been able to experience a lot of that. No. And that is what's so special about the playoffs, is that right there, when you buy into your team playing. And if it was the Flames, dear God, like it would be absolutely incredible, the amount of texts that would be flying back and forth, the amount of just absolute trash talk, like when Cassian and Kachuk go at it. I mean, was there anything in this province for like a 3-week period that was talked about more than that?
Well, maybe the Mike Smith fight. I think people got more fired up.
Mike Smith, yeah, that was good. Yeah,
that brought people back together. And Edmonton and Calgary, they each won a game. People don't even care so much who won the games. They were just like, yeah, I was there for that. And it's fun. Like, that's the emotional, like I was hosting the night show 9 to midnight in 2006. And we used to go on the air till 2 a.m. sometimes. Like, people were so fired up back then. It was the raw emotion. That's the only thing I miss about evenings, was the raw emotion of fans after games.
After a game.
It's something you can't, it's instant. Like, if you go to sleep at night, you're still upset, but you're not nearly as fired up, positively or negatively, as you are right after the game, because very few people are working, and that's their whole focus for those hours.
You know how many people were pumped when you'd stay on later? I don't know how many times we've driven up to an Oiler game to turn around and drive back to Lloyd, right? So the game gets done at, 10:30, you hop in the vehicle, you're not home until 2. And when you guys are done on the radio, you can just hear it, and now it's just silence. You're like, fuck, right? When you guys would carry on those shows, that was unreal.
Yeah, we used to stay late quite a bit. I was a single guy at the time. I had nothing to get home to. So, you know what, if it was good, and we didn't really have a text line then. We might've stayed on until 6 a.m. if there was text lines back then, because, very few people still, a small percentage will only ever call. Right. And, so, everybody will text. So it's just, it's how it's changed for a good thing. There's, it's easier to communicate to your listeners now than ever.
If there's one guest you haven't had yet that you'd love to have on your show, who would that be?
Oof. I've had a lot of big names, but I would say either Michael Jordan or LeBron James. Probably one of those two. Yeah. MJ, I grew up as a huge Michael Jordan fan, and he's just, there's a few questions I've always wanted to ask him about. So, and, we put out the request. I thought I had him last year, and then something came up, but I think, him or LeBron would be unique. Like, LeBron's in a different era. And Michael, we can get into debates who's better, whatever. I still go Michael. But when I look at LeBron James, what he does different is, he's got a bigger platform now and ability to touch people, and he does a lot of positive. What he does with his schools for kids in poor neighborhoods is unbelievable. And we probably don't applaud LeBron James for the human being he is. Like, he's the big superstar. He was kind of like Gretzky. There's never been any off-court issues with LeBron James. Right. He's a happily married guy, or at least what we know of. And, I'm not going to say any different. He's a father figure to his kids. Like, he's one of the rare public figures that has kept his private life really good. And I applaud him for that, not only being, a freak of nature athlete.
Yeah. LeBron is larger than life. He's a guy that, if you're not a basketball fan, somehow you're a basketball fan because of LeBron. I remember watching in Boston Pizza. I took my wife at the time, and I can't remember if we had Shane, my son, my oldest son, I believe we went out for a date night, and I took her to Boston Pizza because it was what would that have been when he wins with Cleveland? Game 7?
Yeah, he won a game
When
7.
they come all the way back.
Yeah.
And I remember being in Boston Pizza and everybody was quiet watching the TVs, and you could hear everybody go up and down, like not in the lounge, in the restaurant. Think about that. I was always so happy for LeBron to come back to his hometown because he got so much criticism. Heck, even for me, right? The way he went about leaving his hometown to then come back and do it the way he did. Yeah, LeBron James would be unreal to have on. But I mean, you talk Michael Jordan. I mean, there's another guy who just transcends sports, right? Like he's in a league of his own.
Yeah, I know, and both fantastic athletes. It's hard to compare eras. The game of basketball has changed so much. It's so much more outside of the 3-point line now than ever. Big men all have to be able to shoot. So yeah, the game's changed. I'd love one of those guys just because they were elite, the two best of their era, no question.
Since the social distancing movement came in and we were supposed to all be, at home for the most part, have you picked up any hobbies?
No. I read so I can read more, but we still have the farm, so I take my son out to our family farm in New Sarep.
Okay.
So, it's calving season starting here next week, so that'll be good. But no new hobbies really, just probably new different activities. Just I get more time at home, which is the good thing with my son, so we get to play a little bit more, helping him with he doesn't have schoolwork, he's in kindergarten, but he has little activity books that he likes to do, and so reading, but no new hobbies, I don't think. And I what's funny, there's nothing right now. I just like reading books, so that would probably be it. There's not a new hobby that's intriguing me. Maybe I should find one, but I don't have one.
What book are you currently reading?
Well, I just finished Holmes.
Yeah.
I just finished a book. A neighbor of mine I grew up with in Leduc for a few years. He suffered from mental illness and schizophrenia, and he wrote a book about it and how he beat it. So I just finished that one, which is cool. It's really short, easy read. And then I have a new book. My mother was a serial killer. I like true stories. So just my wife got it for me online. It's about a girl and her mom was a serial killer, and how. So I don't really know much of the story. I'm intrigued by true stories. And I'm kind of, I know it sounds odd, but I'm intrigued by serial killers. It's kind of a freak thing, but I read a lot of books on serial killers.
Well, they're an anomaly, right?
They're really smart. They're obviously crazy, but the stories about them and how some of them get away with it for so long and no one ever catches them. It's fascinating to me.
If you could go on somebody else's show and co-host, what show would you want to hop on for an episode?
Probably Dan Patrick.
Mm.
Right? Yeah, Dan Patrick show I like a lot. Him or Rome, two American guys. Probably those shows. I know a lot of the guys in Canada. I've talked to them before, so I'd probably have to say Patrick or Rome. They have very different deliveries and how they go about it, so that would be interesting. I'd just like to sit in on them and see.
Okay, and your final one then is, and maybe it'll be one of these answers you've had before, but if you could sit down with anyone, current, past, living, not, and just have a beer and pick their brain, who would you want to sit with?
Oh, wow. It's probably too selfish about my father. My father passed away when I was at NAIT in school in September of 2000. So I was just in my second semester. And my dad and I grew up listening to sports talk radio all the time. So he's never, ever, listened to my show. So I'd like to have a beer with my pops and talk about it, see what he thinks. That would be the number one of somebody who's not alive, without question. Somebody who is alive, probably Obama. He's a very unique personality to me. I thought, his journey to where he got in life and just how he treats people. I have a lot of respect for him. I'm not necessarily a Democrat or Republican per se. I don't lean one way or the other. I'm kind of more of a centrist, to be honest. But Obama just found as fascinating on what he did, how he handled things for 8 years. He'd be a pretty fascinating guy to me.
Obama was the only president in my time. I was in college at that time where they rolled TVs in to watch his debates because he was such a great speaker. Yeah,
well, he was really well, and he's a huge sports fan too, so I could have a lot of fun talking sports with him. But he was unique. I find too much now in politics. People, if you vote one way, it doesn't mean that you have to agree blindly with everything.
100%.
Right? Like I'm one who's changed on where I am in my life on who I voted for. I'm not a believer in, if I voted conservative, when I was 20, I have to vote conservative when I'm 30, 40, 50, or liberal, same thing. So I've always changed for what it adapts to me. And a lot of it has to, who's in my riding. I don't really vote for the leader because, I don't, especially in Alberta, the leader's doing jack squat for us federally. So, but, I've never been one to want to blindly just say, okay, I support this. And doesn't matter. And, Obama had some things that, sure, he didn't always agree with, but I just liked how he handled things. And you're right, as an orator and as a debater, he was fascinating. Yeah,
well, we could go down the politics thing. I mean, there's shows built just on that and get everybody's ruffled. I would say the thing as a younger guy that just bothers me about today's politics is it doesn't seem like there's any, going back to what we talked about right at the beginning, doesn't seem like there's a whole lot of discussion at any point.
No,
it just seems like two stark opposites. We hate each other, and if you are on that side, you hate the other side. And I feel like there's so many people like yourself that are sitting in the middle going like, yeah, that makes sense. A little bit of that makes sense. Why can't we have both? Why can't we do things that are right for, majority of people and do things that make sense across, the time, instead of just yelling at each other and getting nowhere.
Well, I look at, you watch some of the parliament sessions now. I'm like, if children at home spoke to their siblings like that or their friends, parents would be like, what are you doing? That's one, that's two, you're in a timeout, right? Like, they don't allow kids to talk to each other. We teach them that that's not how you converse. And then we just allow them to yell, and like, that's what, like, it's beyond childish in how they can't just have a debate. And and they bring up the same things over and over and over again. Like, once it's in place, I don't have to agree with it, but I can't change it. So you know what? Let's move on to something else. And they're rarely do they ever look and say, okay, how can we work together? Like, now should be the last time to say, well, we have a liberal federal government, we have a UCP in Alberta. Like, well, can't we come together on some things rather than be like, hey, you know what? Lots of people are in financial distress, but let's not worry about that. Let's just continue on with whatever our platform is. And it's really disappointing. Like, I would like your leaders to lead when there's times of toughness. And, I thought Canada's, overall, I don't love Trudeau, but for the most part in this, I think he's done okay overall. But it's funny, people in Alberta right now, Dr. Deanna is that's who they're following because of her poise and how she just tells the truth. And just tell the truth. I think even if you disagree with it, you're like, I don't like it. You respect it because it's the truth. And that's what we tell our kids. So why don't we just ask our politicians to do what we teach our kids?
And I think that's where we'll leave it, because I agree 110%. Really, really appreciate you coming on. It's date as soon as I knew we were going to do this, I've circled, and I've been really looking forward to. So thank you again for joining me. I've really enjoyed this. I'm sure everybody who's listening has enjoyed it just as much.
Well, Shaun, I really appreciate it. Say hi to your brother for me. He'll come over to the dark side.
Will do.